information, the truth, and the levels on radio, UK.
Right, we are back again here on AnonUK and Ireland Radio with me, your host, WivitPawz. I'm not quite sure what happened there, but my laptop died. Spreaker went all a bit weird and it died. But I've managed to get it back now, so with any luck we can carry on. And I have here with me Timothy Good, coming up in the next 10 minutes. I'm just going to quickly stick something on, anything on, just while I try and sort out the rest of everything else that's gone all a bit daft on here. And then we should get back to you and we shall have a bit of a chat with Timothy Good. Here's a little bit of Flyleaf while we're waiting. Right, yes, we're back again now. Obviously, all my talk about the Illuminati and God knows what else got me into trouble. And they tried to cut me off the airwaves, but no, they won't be able to do that. I have on the line Mr. Timothy Good. Now, you'll have to excuse any sound issues that we may have, but he's actually on the phone. So, with any luck, you'll all be able to hear him nicely. Timothy, are you there?
Yes, I am indeed.
Marvellous. It's great to speak to you. Sorry about all the technical issues and God knows what else. They seem to follow me around, which is a bit of a problem. But at least you're here now, which is great. Do you want to tell any of our listeners just a little bit about yourself, first of all, in case they haven't heard from you?
Well, my name is Timothy Good, as of course most of your listeners will know by now.
Yeah.
I have been interested in the subject of unidentified flying objects and aliens since 1955, would you believe, when a cousin from America was visiting, and he was aware of my fascination and passion for aviation and aerospace matters, and so I never forget what he said. He said, "Timothy, you like airplanes, you need to know about flying saucers." So that's what got me started. He sent me a book by Major Donald Kehoe called The Flying Saucers Are Real, and that immediately impressed me by the wealth of reports from military and civilian pilots of strange unknown objects in our skies, confirmed by radar. And people say, well, pilots, yes, okay, they're more average, they're more responsible than most average witnesses. But the fact of the matter is that the reports, most of them are confirmed by radar, either on the plane or on the ground, or usually both. So as far as I'm concerned, the matter of actual existence of UFOs per se has been confirmed for 60 years, probably, if not more. Right.
So what would be your most memorable incident? Or, I mean, have you ever seen anything yourself, or is it just...
I've had a number of sightings of UFOs, but nothing close up. The first was in 1963 with thousands of other people, and I was with my family at the time in southeast London, and we saw this brilliant point of light in a very, very clear sky, and it was there for hours on end, and the Americans sent up interceptor aircraft. They just circled it and probably photographed it. And the official explanation from the Ministry of Defense was that it was a sort of cosmic ray research balloon from Germany, but that really didn't make sense back in 1963. Of course, there are cosmic ray research balloons, but they tend to move.
Yeah.
This thing was absolutely stationary, and it was very, very large. So that was the first. And the last one, I've seen things in the States. My last sighting was, I think, 1997 in Puerto Rico, when together with my then girlfriend, we saw this craft above us, quite high, slightly covered by clouds, zigzagging around, and then suddenly it just shot straight into the ocean, because I've been to Puerto Rico doing research on 7 occasions, and there's no question in my mind that the entire island of Puerto Rico and its environs, particularly the sea, are actually riddled with alien activity. Alien beings have been sighted by thousands of people in Puerto Rico. Their craft are regularly reported. U.S. Navy jets have intercepted them, and sometimes been swallowed up in huge, giant triangular craft, for example.
What would be your reasoning behind that then, as to why it's such a hive of activity, that particular island?
I don't know. I would imagine it has something to do, maybe to do with the climate and the fact that there's a lot of areas in Puerto Rico which it's possible to sort of camouflage yourself. Rainforests, for example.
Mm.
And there are sort of they've obviously established, according to naval sources, they've actually established underground bases, not just under the island, but in the oceans surrounding Puerto Rico.
So when people talk about aliens sort of living among us or working with government or the military, etc., what do you think the probability of that is?
That's a fact.
So you're absolutely.
I'll be visiting this very aspect in my next book, which I might as well mention now.
Of course,
I'd like to know about it, listeners rather, to learn about it. It's not coming out till September. And it's being published in the United States, and it's called Earth, an Alien Enterprise. And it covers many aspects of penetration of our planet by aliens over periods of thousands of years, and the fact that they are among us. I myself have had 3 or 4 encounters with aliens, and it was very, very real.
Can you tell us a bit about those encounters?
Sure, yes. Well, the first one was in 1963 in November. I was touring the United States with the Royal Philharmonic Orchestra, and we'd done a 580-mile trip from Tucson to Los Angeles, and halfway they were kind enough to give us an hour's break to get some food. And I was sitting with 3 of my colleagues, and at one point I noticed, waiting in line, as the Americans say, waiting in a queue, of an extraordinary-looking girl. She was very petite, immaculate complexion, something extremely alert about her, which made me feel that she was from elsewhere. It's difficult to describe exactly how I knew that, but I had studied the subject quite a bit by that time. And so I sent out a thought in my mind, because these people are, or most of them are, telepathic.
Right.
And I said in my mind, okay, if you're who I think you are from elsewhere, would you please do something to prove it to me? So there was no response, so I thought, well, nothing's going to come of it. And anyway, she made a point of coming past our table. She was carrying something, I don't know whether it was a coffee or whatever, but with a deadpan expression on her face. And then as she approached the table, she stopped and gave a very gracious low bow with a delightful smile, then the deadpan expression again, and she walked off, and that was it. Now,
that would have terrified me. If I had, known
you wouldn't have been terrified. These people, for starters, or the people that I know more about, those who are very similar to human beings. In fact, they all say that we are genetically related, and a lot of them say that they actually were responsible for hybridizing us thousands and thousands of years ago from primitive man, from that stage. Some of them can be disturbing, but I can get on to one experience a bit later. But I think the second experience was more convincing, really. This was in 1967. And this time I was with previously was with the Royal Philharmonic Orchestra. This was with the London Symphony Orchestra, which I was a member of for many, many years. And we were giving a series of concerts in Carnegie Hall, New York, and staying at the Park, what was then the Park Sheraton Hotel. And one afternoon I thought I'd experiment with it, telepathy a bit more. So I sent out a thought in my mind. I sat down in the hotel lobby, relaxed, and I said in my mind, okay, if there are any of you guys in the New York area, would you come to this hotel and sit down next to me and prove it? Well, you've got to be careful in hotel lobbies, all sorts of strange people come and go. But finally, this guy comes in. He's about 5'10", straight out of Madison Avenue, as the Americans say, immaculately dressed. A dark suit. I think he had what the Americans call a vest, a waistcoat, white shirt, dark tie, wavy fair hair, and a slightly olive complexion. And he wore thick-rimmed glasses. And he came in and he looked at me, and he finally sat down beside me on the settee in the hotel lobby. So I thought, okay, right, maybe this is the guy I'm looking for. So in my mind I said, well, I should tell you, I should just step back a few minutes, because the first thing he did actually was to undo an attaché case from which he pulled out the New York Times. He went over the pages slowly and deliberately, and then it's as if he wasn't really reading them, and then he folded the newspaper twice, put it in his attaché case, zipped up the attaché case. So I thought, okay. So in my mind I said, if you're the guy I think you might be, would you, from elsewhere, would you please take your right index finger and hold it to the right side of your nose and keep it there? No sooner had I thought that than he did precisely that.
Right.
So then I thought, gosh, well, what comes next? He's going to talk to me. But there was no conversation at any point, and I did not feel encouraged to say anything. But he appeared to be a very pleasant, very intelligent kind of person. But there was no conversation. But he had done what I had requested, and I had my proof for the second time.
So on the whole, you would say that aliens that live among us are what friendly? Are they here for any specific reason?
Unfortunately, that is good and bad everywhere.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, to answer your first question, many of them are indeed very friendly, more friendly than most Earth humans tend to be, in fact. And I would say thousands, perhaps tens of thousands of years ahead of us on the evolutionary scale. And most of those people are here because they say they have a vested interest in this planet, and they always have.
Right.
And the point is that there are others coming here who have an equally vested interest, but for the wrong reasons. It's because and these are most of the guys who are involved in the abduction program, which is extremely disturbing. I don't know how thoroughly you've gone into that, but
yes, I've certainly looked into quite a few of the stories, and obviously some are more famous than others. But
yeah.
There's certainly a lot of them.
Yeah, and I've spoken to people all over the world, and some of the stories are very disturbing. Something is being done to people, and in my new book, Earth, an Alien Enterprise, which comes out in September, published by Pegasus Books in New York, deals with multiple abductions in Puerto Rico by a lady called Maria Rivera and her entire family. They were involved too, and she would see craft in the sky with witnesses, solid flying craft, triangular craft, and various sorts, and she had these very disturbing encounters with these small, I guess you could call them greys if you like.
Right.
She definitely sensed that they did not have our best, they did not have the best of intentions for us.
So are these different?
Although they claimed that they did. They obviously require something for us. And
are there different types?
Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, are there different types? Because you're mentioning now that there are some greys, so there are different types that sort of come here or live here.
Yes, and there are even different types of grey beings, and some of the human types are involved in abductions as well. So it's quite a confusing picture. There's not just the greys and the Nordics or whatever some people like to call them.
Yeah.
There are many various types of beings.
So here's a bit of a sciencey question for you. I'd like to hear your views on the viability of how they get here, because when you take into account that light speed would be like the very top speed of travel, where how far are these aliens coming from, Are they getting here by, standard means, by, just spacecraft, or is there some truth in the
standard. Their spacecraft can travel instantaneously. There's no actual speed involved in some places. It's almost like I don't know. I'm trying to think of a comparable situation, but it is instantaneous.
So
they more than exceed the speed of light.
Right. Okay.
Their technology, don't forget, is perhaps thousands of years ahead of ours, and my understanding is that they have been collaborating with some of our scientific and military people for decades on this planet to give us that technology, and we now have it. Let me just quote something from, there's a guy called Ben Rich, you've probably heard of him. He's the guy who headed the Lockheed Martin's, what's called the Skunk Works, which developed the stealth planes. And this is what he said during a presentation to the Engineering Alumni Association at the University of California in Los Angeles, of which Ben Rich was an alumnus, by the way, back in 1993. This is what he said. And two friends of mine were present, alumni of that Alumni Association. This is what Rich said. We already have the means to travel among the stars, but these technologies are locked up in black projects, that's top secret projects, and it would take an act of God to ever get them out to benefit humanity. Anything you can imagine, we already know how to do. And that was in 1993.
So what would your opinion be on why it's not being made public? Or, I can appreciate that some technologies perhaps are, going to be, above and beyond what the ordinary man needs to know, but...
Exactly. That's precisely the right word, Louise. It's all based on need to know. And a lot of these black projects are sort of encased, shrouded in need to know protocols and so forth. So very few people get to hear about what's going on. But I've published a great deal of new information indicating that we've had the technology for decades. And I've also described how several of our own pilots fly these things regularly, including astronauts, such as Gordon Cooper, who I knew. He never told me this personally, but he certainly told it to a mutual friend that he had actually flown several of these craft as an astronaut, flying craft from other planets which had been given to us and which they were helping us learn to fly, all for the reason that they themselves were as concerned as we are about these others who do not have our best interests at heart regarding our planet.
Right. I mean, obviously there's a lot of people out there that believe in these big government UFO cover-ups, or at least alien technology cover-ups and such like. So you're actually saying that there is definite truth in a lot of, obviously some of them are bunkum, but like you've said just now, that there are craft that astronauts and pilots are flying. That there is some truth behind some of these government cover-up conspiracies?
Absolutely. I can take it further, Louisa. We talk about NASA. NASA has been a front for the real space program for decades.
Right.
I can tell you that. Well, Americans have got bases on the moon, probably Mars. The United States Air Force Space Command is in charge. That's the real NASA, if you like. They're in charge of a lot of the operations and the construction of these craft and liaison and all sorts of things.
I see. I've always been very, very interested in it, and my mother especially has quite a vested interest because
yes.
she's actually seen something, and I think at some point she did get in touch with you.
Yes, unfortunately I can't find a link, but maybe I'll be glad to chat with her.
I'm sure it'll be there somewhere, but yeah, she's been in touch with SETI and all sorts of places where she's tried to get more information. What is it that people can do? Because you say that there's you've been able to speak to some of them using telepathy. Is that a skill that's innate in all of us?
Yes, it is, but it's generally speaking far more developed by aliens than it is in our own species. But I should also point out they do have remarkable gadgetry for stimulating things like telepathy. And I'm quite sure, I mean, it's said that human beings don't use more than 8% of the brain. And I know a few people who probably use considerably less, as we all do. But we haven't really developed our brains properly. And if you think of a highly advanced technology in conjunction with what we have in our remarkable brains, this is what the aliens say that they have. They have phenomenal abilities to foresee things and to read your mind. I've had this experience on, I've already described two. I had somewhat of a disturbing experience in Poland. That was my last encounter. About 7-8 years ago in Wrocław.
Right.
I had been invited to an international UFO conference in Wrocław, and the previous night I had been invited as the guest of honor to a prestigious debating salon. And this had nothing to do with the UFO conference. I mean, these people were very skeptical scientists, retired military, retired politicians, psychiatrists, doctors, you name it. They were all there. There were about 80 people there. I was the guest of honor. I gave a 35-minute presentation. There were strict rules. It started at about 7 o'clock. I talked my talk and showed my slides and so forth. And then there was a break, and then it was opened up to the audience, and I could contribute if I wanted to. They could either ask me questions or they would make statements, and they weren't allowed to speak for more than about 3-4 minutes, 5 minutes, something like that. And I'll never forget the time when the first people to speak were, one after the other, two psychologists who were apoplectic with rage. They said, this is outrageous that we have this ridiculous subject discussed at this prestigious salon.
I can imagine.
And it went on, and this aroused the wrath of two military pilots from the Polish Air Force who stood up and said, you don't know what you're talking about. We're the guys that have to deal with it. And then he called on his colleague, a pilot, to describe his own very close and alarming encounter with a flying saucer. So it went on like that for hours on end. Now, the last person to speak was someone I'd had my eye on throughout the entire evening. And I just had the strong feeling that he was from elsewhere. He was quite similar to the guy I saw in New York in 1967, but slimmer, slightly less tall than the guy in New York. But he definitely, as far as I was concerned, I thought he was the real thing. I tried telepathy, no response whatsoever. I have to cut a long story short here because a whole series of bizarre things happened. But in any event, people have said to me, "Why don't you talk to these guys, Tim?" So I thought I'm going to talk to this guy after the whole thing's finished. So he wasn't sitting that far away from me, but after the entire presentation was finished, he came towards me. I mean, he had to get out of the way, and in so doing, he had to pass me. So I didn't accost him. I just had my business card with me, and I gave him my business card with one hand, and then I went to shake his hand, and it was a completely cold handshake, no grip, absolutely nothing. And he just looked into my eyes, completely unblinking. And the only thing I said to him was, "I think you have a great deal of knowledge." And then he took the business card, he said absolutely nothing, and walked away. It's the last I saw of him. Now, he happened to be the last person to give a short presentation. I don't know how long it was. It could have been 5 minutes, it could have been 10, but the subject of his talk was Earth's future in space. Okay?
Right.
So that's when I said to him, I think you have a great deal of knowledge, because I'd absorbed what he'd spoken and been absolutely taken in. It was fantastic what things that he was coming up with. 10 minutes later, after she'd gone, I started chatting to some of the friends who'd brought me there at this prestigious salon. And I said, who is that guy there? And he said, oh, he's very interesting. He's always got something interesting to say on all sorts of topics. He's a doctor of some sort, I don't know what. And I said, well, yeah, what actually was it he was talking about? Because by this time, I could remember nothing. And they all said, oh, it was about Earth's future in space. I said, yes, I can remember that much. But what did he say? Nobody that I spoke to could remember. How about that?
That is odd.
Then all sorts of weird things happened. I tried to, the speaker, I mean, this is a professional salon. The speaker at these debates is supposed to get a tape recording of the event. He or she is supposed to get photographs of them and people at the thing. Absolutely nothing was forthcoming. I couldn't get through to people. The photographers, the professional photographers who'd taken pictures, professional pictures at the time, never got back to me. I couldn't get a single photograph taken of me at that conference, which was all part and parcel of the arrangement. And it was absolutely bizarre. And finally I was taken back to this wonderful castle where I was being put up for a few days, and we talked again. I said, can any of you remember what he was talking about? He said, we only know what the title of the talk was. And then I said, well, there must be, I'll get tape recording. He said, oh yes, you should, you know, it's a matter of course that all visitors at the debates, you know, the guests, special guests get a tape. I could never get a tape. I couldn't get anything. Absolutely nothing. You're supposed to get all sorts of written printed stuff, you know, in their magazine and everything about the people who spoke and praises of what they said. I could get nothing. I couldn't get in touch with people. It was absolutely bizarre.
Which begs the question as to why.
Disturbing.
Yeah, I mean, you know, if nobody has any memory of whatever he said, you know, are you thinking that maybe just a select few will remember what he said, or was it completely across the board that nobody...
Well, Louisa, there were nearly 80 people there. I didn't have a chance to meet them, and you know, it would have taken an age to access everybody there, but I wrote to the chap whose salon it was, Professor Dudek. It was called Professor Dudek's salon. He died about a year later. There was a lady who was going to try and find out more for me. She had cancer anyway, and she died about 6 months, a year later, sadly. And so it went on and on. I could never get any information. But what I now feel is that something was projected to us subliminally. He was definitely talking, and it's all been absorbed in our brains, but he then managed to take it away. And I think that at maybe some future point in time, there's something there that will be unlocked. It's not entirely unprecedented, but that was the experience. I've never had an experience like that before.
No, I mean, that sounds it's certainly quite odd. I've got a couple of questions from some of our listeners, if you don't mind.
I'd be delighted.
The first one I've got here is from Bob, which is, you know, what do you think about aliens active on Earth in the presidency or the military? What are your thoughts on...
Yes, not the presidency.
Right.
Some presidents have definitely had direct communications, no question about that. I've written a lot about that in my new book, and I think at this juncture you'd be very interested to know that last December the Russian Prime Minister, Dmitry Medvedev, he'd been giving an interview on television, and when the interview had finished, he went to the side, and another journalist started interviewing him, and he thought the microphones were off and everything. And this woman asked him, this journalist asked him, just last December 2012, interviewed him, and at one point the Prime Minister was asked, this is Medvedev, if the president, that's Putin, Vladimir Putin, who's president, they swap sometimes. I mean, Medvedev used to be the president. Now he's prime minister.
Yeah.
Putin is president, but he can become prime minister if Medvedev comes back again. But I think that they're restricted in the amounts of time they can be in the post. But this journalist interviewed him, and she asked if the president was handed secret files on aliens when receiving the briefcase needed to activate Russia's nuclear arsenal.
Right.
Along with the briefcase with nuclear codes, Medvedev responded, apparently seriously, the president is given a special top-secret folder which in its entirety contains information about aliens who visited our planet and a report of the absolutely secret special service that exercises control over aliens on the territory of our country. I will not tell you how many of them are among us because it may cause panic. Now, of course, a lot of journalists, this made the Times, I think, and Telegraph, and all sorts of online, at any rate.
Yeah.
Lots of newspapers in Moscow commented. A lot of people were quite baffled and divided. You know, they think, oh, well, of course, it was just a joke. But I don't know if you can still get it online. You can Google Medvedev aliens December 2012. I think it was December the 7th, if memory recalls.
Right.
And you can see if that's still available. It should be. Somebody should have put it on YouTube. But he suddenly becomes people. One of the British newspapers said, "Oh, he was joking and laughing as he said it." He was not. He looked absolutely dead serious about it. And I have no doubt that was actually, he was speaking the truth.
Yeah.
As for the military, yes, quite a number of them work with our military. And of course, as I said earlier, they've been involved in handing over their technology. I even knew some chap who became a very good friend, Professor Stefano Breccia, a scientist. I spent time with him in Italy, and sadly he died a year ago, prematurely, and he's actually flown in one of these craft, and he's had encounters, and he, together with dozens of other people, highly qualified people, scientists, lawyers, politicians, not so many politicians, but people from all walks of life in Italy were involved in this extraordinary, it was called the Amicizia. Amicizia stands for friendship. Amicizia group of aliens, as they called themselves, who had established communications with hundreds of human beings from all walks of life all around the world, and they had bases. They had enormous bases, some of them like 150 miles deep, 150 miles in length, and miles below the surface in Italy, in the Adriatic Sea. And they have bases all over the world. They can create them very, very quickly. They have the technology, being tens of thousands, maybe of years ahead of us, certainly thousands. They can create these very, very quickly, and they have the technology to manipulate matter to the extent that the bases can be completely sealed down in a matter of minutes, if necessary. So quite an extraordinary situation, and quite a number of the people were flying these craft regularly, sometimes with aliens and often without. And the military, to answer your caller's comment about involved with the military, well, the Italian Air Force has certainly flown a number of these craft. That's the information I have.
Well, I mean, this brings me on to another question.
And the Brits,
and the Americans, as well.
And doubtless many other nations, Germans, Russians, and this has been going on for quite some time.
Well, Snatchy Patchy would like to know that if these, these other species have invaded our military, have they invaded the military, and if so, why would they do that? Do they mean us harm? Or are they
infiltrated as opposed to invaded. I wouldn't use the word invasion. I think these particular ones most definitely do not wish us harm. And thank God they're around, and they've always been around on this planet, sometimes less visible at other times, but they definitely have our best interests at heart, and they themselves have as vested an interest in this planet as we do, perhaps even more so, because they understand a great deal more about how the planet operates and about the other hostile groups that unfortunately do not have our best interests at heart.
I mean, I'm just wondering if there are these different factions, some that are sort of have malicious intent, and others that don't.
Yes.
I understand the whole need to know basis when it comes to information, but why don't those who are obviously our allies to some degree, why don't they just come forward and sort of reveal themselves?
Well, there's no way they can come forward publicly on a large scale.
Why is that?
It all has to be done fairly secretly, but they certainly have had hostile situations with some of these less than friendly beings. No question about that. That's been going on for quite a long time. And in fact, in my last book, Need to Know, UFOs, the Military and Intelligence, I've written at length about what can only be described as an air war, which was started back in the 1940s, at the end of the Second World War, if not a little bit earlier than the end of the war, when flying saucers were increasing all over the planet, and the United States Air Force managed to shoot down quite a number of these craft, which were used and recovered, and the technology was developed over a period of several years. And this led to, I can only describe it as an air war. There was retaliation on an enormous scale. In the 1940s, 1947, it really started in a big way. Because some of these craft have been bringing down our experimental missiles, like the captured V-2 rockets and things, and the Americans took exception to that, and they were able to shoot down a number of craft. Funnily enough, the craft were vulnerable to our conventional cannon shells, but they were, you couldn't knock them out of the sky with anything very, very sophisticated. But certain types of ordnance used against them brought them down, and there was a war, and they took revenge. And they not only took revenge on our military aircraft, but on our airliners as well. And you can imagine innocent people in an airliner, nothing to do with the military, being shot out of the sky or forced to crash at the end of the runway on takeoff. I mean, I've got all that stuff in the book. I myself was shocked when I learnt about it about 10 or so years ago. Yeah. But I had it from a very, very good source who was very well informed.
Well, that is quite extraordinary, really. I mean, obviously there's an awful lot going on, an awful lot more going on than most people realise. Obviously someone like yourself that studies it in depth and has good connections with a lot of people, is... you're quite vital to us then, really, aren't you? So, it's just interesting to be able to hear, from your point of view, exactly what you've encountered and exactly what's going on, because there's an awful lot of misinformation out there, and obviously quite a lot of people who are actually quite scared of the prospect that there could be alien life living among us. And
that's understandable, particularly, if they've seen films about alien abductions and things. I mean, that is kind of scary. I think you'd agree.
Yeah, there are quite a few. My son in particular was fascinated by the McPherson's tape story, whatever that was. That was something that he went on. Literally, a whole family ended up, just disappearing.
Oh, tell me more. It sort of rings a bell.
It's the McPherson family. They were, I think it was New Year's Eve or Thanksgiving, something like that. But strange things began happening in the house. Each of them received sort of like a funny burn to the back of their neck, I think it was, that really, really, really burnt, then just stopped.
Yeah.
Lights came on and off. A couple of them went outside to see what was going on. That didn't return. The car engine had been sort of melted in places, so they couldn't leave. And it all sort of culminated in the entire family going missing. Nobody ever heard from them again, and it was just assumed that they had either been abducted or some other sort of foul play. But there are quite a few horror stories out there about these abductions. I mean,
I know.
Everything from sort of dissecting cows to, the classic anal probe stories. You can understand why.
Yeah. I'm glad you mentioned that. I'm sorry to interrupt you.
That's fine. No.
That also is related to the hybridization program. They require substances for their dastardly deeds, if you like,
Yeah.
creating. The purpose of those doing the abductions, my information, is to create a hybridized species which is more adaptable. So making them more adaptable, a mix of them and us, to make them more adaptable.
And is this carrying on? Is this allegedly? Is this carrying on? Is this still something that they're doing?
I can't tell you because I don't know.
No.
I wouldn't be surprised if it's still going on, but I don't know for sure. I think it's died down somewhat. Either that, or people are less vocal about, talking about discussing their encounters.
A lot of people, end up getting ridiculed for it. So there probably is a vast
absolutely.
amount of people that
Yes.
don't come forward. I should think. But it's it's been really, really interesting talking to you. It's certainly got people in chat, talking about it, and it's answered a few questions that I had as well. I'd love to find out a little bit more about how they travel here, because that's another interesting one.
Sure.
So I've got a bit of homework to do now. Go back and have a little bit of look into that. But have you had any funny encounters? Anything humorous?
Oh well, for example, there was a former president of the obscure former Soviet Republic of Kalmykia, a guy called Kirsan Ilyumizhinov, former president of that area, Kalmykia, and he's no longer in politics, but he's a billionaire. He's currently president of the World Chess Federation, an extraordinarily bright man, and he claims to have been taken on board an alien spacecraft during a business trip to Moscow in 1997. And he said it was all very real. They are people like us. He told a journalist, I talked with them, I understood that we are not alone, we are not unique. And he gave a few details. I mean, this craft actually picked him up, levitated him from his balcony in Moscow. So there are stories like that, but most politicians do not discuss the subject because they think it makes them look foolish. But
they could lose credibility, couldn't they?
He's the only president I know that's come out, apart from Jimmy Carter. Though he never claimed to have met aliens, he did actually claim to have seen a craft at one point.
That's right. Yeah. What would be your advice to anybody out there who is either trying to find out more about UFOs, trying to study it on their own case, or even the skeptics out there? What would you say to the many skeptics who think that the whole UFO thing and the alien thing is bunkum? What would you say to them?
Skepticism is a healthy thing that we humans have, just to study. It's a huge subject.
I suppose it's a case of
infinite possibilities.
Trying to find some reliable sources of information. Which brings me back to your book again. When's your new book out, and what's it called again?
It's Earth and Alien Enterprise.
Earth and Alien Enterprise.
And it's going to be published in New York by Pegasus Books in September.
Right. So when's it likely to be available in the UK? Will it be available at the same time, or?
I hope so.
So with any luck,
I don't know yet.
But
there's a lot of interest.
Well, I will certainly be getting it, and I know my mum will be getting it, and I strongly, suggest that anybody else gets it as well, because it sounds like it's going to be absolutely jam-packed.
There'll be some extraordinary information in it, including a large, clear, colour photograph of a 10-foot tall alien. How about that?
Oh, that's got to be worth it anyway then. I'll pre-order my copy now.
People might refer to him as an incredible hunk.
The Incredible Hunk. Oh, that's that. Well, I'm definitely getting one now. I'll definitely be buying you. Well, look, it's been absolutely brilliant talking to you. Thank you ever so much for coming on, and you're more than welcome to come on maybe when your book's published, maybe. And
sure, I'd love to, Louisa. Thank you so much.
That would be brilliant. Thank you ever so much again, Timothy.
My pleasure.
Thanks. Bye bye.
Bye bye.
oh blimey, and knocked my microphone over and everything. How was that? Timothy Good, isn't he great? And, you know, he's the sort of man I would have at a dinner party, because I could talk to him for absolutely hours. But, you know, go out and get his book. I'll read some of his older ones, because he's got absolutely tons. And, you know, he's done an awful lot of research and spent a lot of years looking into this. And, you know, sometimes, you know, even the biggest skeptics, you know, I think, you know, break down some of those barriers and just go for it and have a look at some information, you know, because you don't know, one day you could suddenly be confronted by an incredible hunk, and you've got to go all telepathic on him, and unless you read his books, Timothy Good's books, you just won't know how to. So, you know, I suggest everyone goes out and, you know, in September gets his books, and in the meantime get some of his other ones, because I've got a few of them at home and they're absolutely great. I am going to stick another tune on now, and coming up after that I'm going to do a quick recap of today's news.